on our December 10th, 2024 meeting. We will get right into our agenda. With that being said, actually, I lied. We will not get right into our agenda. We understand we have a large number of students who are here joining us. Thank you for joining us. We will make this as entertaining as we possibly can. So with that being said, we'll call the meeting to order. Any modifications to the agenda? Hearing none, we'll continue and we'll begin with the receiving and hearing of delegates, including public comments. And I do believe, I thought we had folks who were signed up.
Public comment. Summer Killian, you can come up.
If you would use the microphone, it helps people at home listen and hear better for recording purposes. Thank you so much.
Okay, to sit. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Does that work? Okay.
Hope so. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to share a public comment tonight. My name is Summer Killian. I'm a former Beverly J. Martin Elementary parent, having lived down the block from the school since 2011. My kids went there starting in 2018 and attended the school until the end of last year. And this year they began school in 2nd and 4th grade at Bell Sherman. So tonight I'm asking the board to closely examine some of the circumstances which vary from most of the other at BJM, which vary from most of the other elementary schools in the district, and which may be prompting families to request to move their kids out of the school. Similar circumstances have also caused teachers and support staff who are desperately needed and beloved at the school to make the same decision and leave. There were other families who open enrolled out of BJM at the same time that we did. And there are more families who are considering leaving at the end of this school year. It's important to understand why so many families are leaving, but it's also important, and even more so, to understand what life is like for students and staff who do not or cannot leave the school. After all, no one should have to. And it was a really difficult decision for my family to go. I moved my kids due to inconsistencies in the areas of supervision, communication, and special education. BJM cannot afford these types of inconsistencies. The state education school data website will tell you that 1/3 of the kids who attend BJM are students with disabilities. My kid was one of them. 10% of students are homeless. 67% of the families that attend BJM are what the state refers to as economically disadvantaged. Over the course of our 5 years at BJM, we met so many dedicated school employees. They are probably not in a position to report on the issues that they see on a daily basis, but I can tell you that if they had an anonymous way to do so or a formal way to do so, you would be hearing from them. I understand there's been an effort to communicate the needs of the educators to the district recently, and that they're receiving some support. This is really new, and it's crucial that it's sustained. In the past, when I personally have asked about differences between the elementary schools in our district, I've been told that some schools have a wealthier PTA or a different demographic. BJM has some bad kids, but I can assure you that there are some differences. There's a solid framework for day-to-day function that we've noticed at Bell Sherman that has been really difficult to find in recent years at BJM. At Bell Sherman, for instance, caregivers receive a weekly letter from the main office. We get ample notice about school activities. We know who to call if our kids are going to be sick or absent. We spent a couple years not knowing at BJM. The school called us over the summer to get to know our students. If one of my kids has trouble during the day, and they do, we hear about it promptly. We received a printed family handbook over the summer in the mail. This is so simple, so accessible, so equitable, so vital to ensure that a community of families has basic access to information about the public school where they send their kids. And this kind of firm footing has seemed difficult to establish over the last couple of years at BJM. So you may be asking why I still care so much when I'm no longer officially affiliated with the school, and that's fair enough. What I'm hopeful for is that my presence tonight will help to open up and continue a dialogue among multiple elements of the ICSD and the BJM community. I just want you to please talk to families and employees at BJM, those who are still there, those who have left. I'm really grateful to the district for the support that I've heard that they're now providing. But please consider that the issues that are just now being addressed took some years to develop and will probably take just as much time to reform. And every single day, caregivers leave their children to walk through those doors with a certain expectation, that of a free, comprehensive, high-quality education that's on par with the other schools in this district, and which prepares them for life in this broader community as they grow. So please, all eyes on BJM. Thank you.
Any additional public comments tonight? Chris?
That's it.
That is it. That would bring us to any board responses.
I'm somewhat puzzled about the request for an opportunity to let the board or anyone else know what's going on. I would like to remind everyone again that there are numerous opportunities here at board meetings. Many of us have published our phone numbers, our emails are read. Every one of us reads our emails, usually daily. And I'm saddened to hear that there are people who didn't feel they could share this. We rely on members of the public, students, and staff telling us what's happening. Dr. Brown keeps us up to date as much as he can, and we each have contacts within the schools themselves, of course, but it's vitally important that people share with us what they're thinking. And I can honestly tell you that this is, other than a discussion with Dr. Brown last week, this is the first time I've heard of any widespread discontent. So thank you for coming in, and please encourage others when they have a concern to do that. If they feel like they cannot take care of it at the school level, they need to be sharing it with people with other levels. Thank you.
Any other board responses?
Thank you, Summer, for sharing. Aside from your sharing, I just want to remind the community and our community that we have a communication protocol for parents and caregivers on the Ithaca City School District website. Why I keep bringing people back to the communication protocol, because I was involved in a community group at that time that created the communication protocol. And we wanted to ensure that parents and caregivers know the different stages in which to communicate in case of their child being out or anything like that, or if there's any concerns or issues. And all of the schools are listed, contact information are listed for elementary and secondary schools. So I would always encourage, I know every year at the beginning of the year, each school tries to put that in whatever backpack notices, as well as, well, not each school, elementary does backpack notices, secondary doesn't do that. But yet it is on our website and is updated on an annual basis.
Any other board responses?
Just thank you for coming. Appreciate that. And we will have some conversations about some of your concerns and try to address them.
I'll just add also, thank you for coming, and we will continue our conversations. That will move us to student reps. I believe LACS went first last time, Ithaca High School. Claire, good to see you.
Well, our first thing is that this past week, 10 selected students traveled to Rochester to rehearse and perform as part of the NYSSMA All-State Performing Ensembles, where students across the entire state were invited to perform in instrumental ensembles and choirs. So we rehearsed 9 hours a day for 3 days and then put on a great performance in Kodak Hall at the Eastman School of Music. On a similar note, the IHS music program is also having a very eventful month. Last week, the IHS orchestras put on a successful concert, and the choir will be performing tomorrow in Culp Auditorium at 7:30 p.m. And the bands will be performing next Wednesday, December 18th at 7:30 as well. The IHS Jazz Cabaret will be in the choir rooms this Friday at 7:30 p.m.
Okay. The bathrooms have been pretty clean, with the teachers occupying a table on the outside to survey students. and the vapes and lunch trays have stopped presenting themselves in places that they shouldn't be. However, we've noticed the continuation of lunch trays being misplaced, so we'll work actively to solve this. Speaking of food, people have been budging lines because more preferred options run out faster. So there are admin who reinforce people at the head of the lines, but people just like cut in the middle to resort to not being caught cutting. But another incentive for line budgers is that the library seating is very limited, so they must rush to the front of the line and to like arrive first for a seat at the library. Also, sometimes food like portions are not sufficient for students, so a solution could be to replenish the salad bar more often. But Ms. Hardesty also said that she would talk with the nutrition folks and let them know that we need more food. There are also many initiatives around the school to help communities in need. First, IHS Key Club recently held a 12-day food drive donating to loaves and fishes. They're also partnering with the American Red Cross to host a blood drive next Tuesday during the school day. Global Alliances is organizing a book drive in support of the Family Reading Partnership through December 20th. And a new food drive is also in process right now for first period classes across participating teachers with a pizza party as a reward.
All right. The NHS ceremony was planned for this Thursday from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. at the IHS Culp Auditorium. However, it was just canceled by Ms. Hartley just now, so it will likely be rescheduled for this month. The NHS ceremony is where students will officially become a part of the National Honor Society, and parents will get the opportunity to watch as well. To become a member of the society, each student is required to have completed a total of 50 community service hours by the end of the school year. And moving on, we had our first fall festival on November 26th at the end of the school day, which was organized by the Ambassadors Club. It included a lot of arts and crafts activities, snacks and sports, and a talent show. And overall, it went well, and we plan on doing it again next year.
A meeting with Mr. Bryman and Ms. Hardesty about recycling yielded very positive results. So we're going to be attempting a paper-only recycling program. And last year's pilot program that we run seemed to result in decreasing recycling contamination, but there were students who were tossing unwashed cans into them. And even trace amounts of non-water liquid can contaminate the whole thing. So we're putting a pause on the wholesale recycling efforts and instead focusing on paper and cardboard for an early start. And unfortunately, Cademan could not be here today, but he wanted me to pass this on. I'm grateful for the opportunity which I had today to attend a restorative justice training session at DeWitt Middle School. Many thanks to Mr. Byman and Ms. Hardesty for making this possible.
Thanks. Oh, sorry about that. So Stella's at a game right now and was unable to come. Our second annual Winter Carnival is this Friday, starting at 5:30. The Winter Carnival was born out of a small fundraising project I was in last year. It's a fundraising night where we all come to the school, families, and community members. Anyone is invited. Family groups offer bake sales, craft sales, auctions, performances, activities, and games. It was a huge success last year, and we're hoping for the same this year. This year's student-directed Shakespeare play, The Tempest, was a success. We held it in the Boynton Black Box. There was good turnout, and it was a lot of fun. Speaking of, the theater department has settled on a musical, Hadestown, and they're in the beginning stages of that. Solstice Lunch is approaching. Solstice Lunch is a multidimensional celebration unique to LACS and one of our very important community experiences. We all gather in the gym and feast. Each family group decides what they're eating, the setting of many fond memories. We just voted in all-school meeting to extend Solstice Lunch through the last 2 periods of the day. So that'll be the last Friday before break. Middle school scheduling began this week for second semester classes, and we had 3 girls that made it on the middle school modified basketball team.
Yeah, I'm battling a cold, so if I cough, apologies. So at LACS, we're facing an issue. It's pretty hard to ignore, and it has to do with the capital project. At LACS, bathrooms were renovated, and we had a brand new front entrance done. And while we appreciate what's done, there are some projects that remain uncompleted. So number one being there's a set of doors from the main entrance to the black box that haven't been hung yet. Keeping in mind it's been over a year. There's a set of doors near an interior staircase and elevator to the vestibule, which leads outdoors into the black box, which are not operable as well. Lighting and heating in the principal and health offices are also not operable. The heat and the lights, they go in and out. They flicker every 10 minutes. And in fact, our principal has had to go out of her way and buy lamps on her own dime to keep light in the room at all times. And finally, the living wall. So we had a living wall installed in our main office. The workers did a fantastic job installing it, and it was agreed that a portion of the budget would be allocated towards a one-year partnership so the students in the Green Thumb Committee, which basically is the plant maintenance committee, could learn how to use the water system, could learn how to replace the plants, change the fertilizer, etc. Then admin was informed that a partnership was no longer available, even though it had been previously agreed to as part of the budget. And then admin was told, well, there's an instruction manual. So just find the instruction manual. And we found the instruction manual. It wasn't clear. And people are rightfully upset because there was an agreed partnership and now it's not happening. And if you go to ACS and go to plant, well, half the plants are dying. Because we can't maintain the system, because the committee cannot maintain the system. So yeah.
Thank you, student reps. Board responses.
Once again, this is the first I've heard of the living wall problems, as well as the doors not being completed. Facilities meets on Thursday, and next week, the overall group of architects and construction people and facilities meets. And I can assure you we'll be talking about this. Thank you.
Additional board member responses. Thank you to our student reps, and I am looking forward to learning more at facilities. See you there.
4:45 on Thursday.
I'll be there at 5:16. That brings us to our consent agenda. We can entertain motions and then open for discussion.
I move to approve all consent agenda items listed in the consent agenda. Consideration of accounts, personnel reports, students, and minutes of previous meetings is presented.
Second.
Moved by Adam, second by Jill. Discussion, conversation, questions, debates. Dr. Cronwitz, you got a question?
Yeah. I just, the only thing, I just wasn't sure that I really understood the question about the resolution to approve the 25-26 program services cost allocation methodology for shared services unit cost determination at TST BOCES. I read it, but I wasn't 100% sure like what we were moving forward with that. And I didn't know if there was any more clarification about it, or I just didn't do a good job reading it.
I am unable to provide more information at this time. I don't know if anyone for the admin team is able to provide more information.
Pulling it up here to make sure I have it. Just a second. Hi, everyone. I'm Zach Lind. What you're looking at is when we contract with BOCES. BOCES is our regional shared consortium that we participate with to access lots of services that school districts may not offer themselves. And so what you have there is just a list of how they're charging for each different service and the methodology that they're using for it. You'll see the term, for example, RWAD, which we use or we'll say as RWADA. That's, when it says that, that's a per student ratio. So they base it on the number of students enrolled in our district at a specific point in October called Beds Day. So really all it is just a spreadsheet that's explaining how the cost methodologies work out. And if you, BOCES actually comes in later in the school year and they go through a lot of their different programming, but it's really depending on how the service is used. If we choose to access it, it's going to be at a certain cost. Some of the services we pay into no matter what. And they all have different sort of formulas for how it works. So that's sort of the general overview.
And does that change like on a typical year, or is that something that?
Yeah, so it depends on the formula that are used. Some of the methodology, well, the methodologies are generally the same, but our cost will change year to year. For example, sometimes they'll average multi-year engagement with the COSER, and that will then, based on how much we spent the previous years in a certain area of our budget, that there'll be a new rate for this year. And then if we have more students enrolling in our schools overall, our per student rate will go up. If we have less students in our district overall, it would be less. So that's where you see those fluctuations. And this is all the districts in the region access these services using those same methodologies.
Okay.
Additional questions?
No, thanks.
And I presume that this is the very document that allows us to participate in COSERs.
Yeah, yes, it's
Right.
part of that process.
So if we sign on, then we're able to join with other districts and use TST BOCES for funding of the services you listed here that are here. That's what I thought it was. I wanted to make sure I heard from Zach to make sure I understood it correctly.
Yeah, I think we got it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Additional questions board members may have? I will say now I had a email exchange with Adam. This is something that I would like the HR committee to look into. And reading our personnel report, I for years have wondered and questioned why in some categories we list a reason when there are times when I'm not sure that that reason is generally necessary to be public. A couple of examples were someone who is on leave and it will say medical or it will say whatever it may be. And so if it's required by law, then by all means, then it is. If it's not required by law, and I'm looking to Jill as, just so the community knows, as the chair of the HR committee. But I'd like to see a question about what we're listing and what the value of that is, under what circumstances. Just something I've been thinking about for years as we've done our personnel reports. Sometimes people should have a right to privacy, but I also don't know what that means. So just want to put that out there before I voted on this one. I also want to recognize that we had Matt O'Donnell was able to secure a grant from the Caper Center, which seems like an exciting opportunity. So we want to thank Matt for that work. And also one of the things I found interesting, the board put out a bid for cheese and pepperoni pizza. It's interesting to see that we received only one bid back. So that was something that was interesting to read as well. Hope you all enjoy the pizza. Any other discussion items, board members? Fantastic. Hearing none, we'll call the question. All in favor of the consent agenda? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. We will continue on with our agenda for this evening, and that is school district business. We should make mention that Dr. Brown is not with us this evening. I don't know the exact number, but I believe in 14 years, this may be the 4th meeting that he's missed. It's a pretty impressive attendance record, and is presenting at a conference that is happening today. So we'll have Dr. Brown with us next week. I'm mentioning that because normally this would be the time where we would hear our superintendent's report that is not on the agenda because our superintendent is not with us. And so that will bring us right to board school district business. And our first agenda item is a discussion and conversation about a possible capital project. And I don't know if that is amongst the board, if I know the board is ready to have some of that conversation, I assume, or if there's additional information from administration, anyone such admin who's been required to present anything, and it's all us. Fantastic. If you have questions, you're all already here to make that happen. So board members, to set a little bit of context, particularly for those who may be listening at home to understand the conversation, there's been some dialogue at OACM meetings, owner, architecture, construction management meetings, There's been some conversations at facilities committee meeting, including the last facilities committee meeting. And the question is about whether or not the district should consider another capital project or reconsider a capital project that in terms of what that could look like. What would be the auspices? What would be the time frame? What would be some of the things that we consider in doing a capital project? And that's the reason for this conversation here this evening. At this point in time, nothing has been determined. It's an open conversation and dialogue amongst the board. We're trying to get an idea of either how the board feels, information or feedback we may receive from other folks, where we want to go. And I know because Jill has been very much involved. I don't know if there's anything that you'd like to say, Dr. Tripp, about this as well.
I'd set the stage just a bit by saying that I have been privy to these discussions, and I think our general consensus has been that what we would like to suggest to the board is a relatively small capital project this year, perhaps that would be voted upon at some time other than the school board election time, because it's now getting fairly close to when we would need to have that together if we were going to have that vote in May. I'll remind everyone that the capital project budget is separate from the operating budget for the school district, and how it has been used and how it is, I think, supposed to be used is to handle both routine maintenance of our many school buildings, our many elderly school buildings, and for new projects that the community and the district see a need for. So currently we're looking at between a $30 and $40 million proposal for this upcoming capital project. And it does include a lot of things that those of us who've been talking about it see as necessary. For example, new electrical transformers, I guess, new electrical things at Boynton and DeWitt, because the ones that are currently running the electrical system at those middle schools are well past their normal expected age. And if we don't deal with it sooner, we end up having to deal with it later and having it be much more expensive. So that's a bit of what's going on.
I would just add two things to that conversation in terms of setting the framework. When the school district went out in May for its capital project that was not approved by the voters, I would like folks to know that that is part of a long-term planning process, particular fiscal responsibility. And the goal has been to keep a certain percentage of the school district budget dedicated to debt service, and that debt service is all connected to the projects that Dr. Tripp is talking about. So whether it be a project at LACS, whether it be a new STEM wing that's coming to the high school, whether it be a new entrance at South Hill, and then whether it be other things like a new roof for the high school, boiler systems, a geothermal at Enfield. Those are some of the new construction and sort of not just regular upkeep, but what some people call deferred maintenance. And if you look at the Ithaca City School District Building Condition Survey, which we're coming up, I think, next year on a new one, there are literally hundreds of millions of dollars of deferred maintenance projects that the district should consider. Some are much more essential, like need to be done next year. Some we can fix, like our excellent maintainers and facilitators do as we speak. And so part of this conversation is in context of that conversation about long-term fiscal planning to make sure that we are not only keeping the district and its facilities in usable space, but also trying to save us money long run so we don't have to do a major repair if we can fix some small things now. And so that's part of the conversation as well that folks should know. So whatever the amount may be and whatever the time may be, at some point in time, the district will have to do a capital project because we will have things that we need to fix. Or as a school community, we'll have things that we need to fix. So Adam, I apologize. Thank you.
Oh, no, that's okay. No, I was just going to add two things, just the two logistics, I guess, that when we ask for a certain dollar amount in these projects, it's just, it gives the capacity to spend up to that amount. It doesn't necessarily mean that we go out and spend that amount right away. And also just to remind people that because of state aid that's associated with the capital projects, a lot of the funding for the capital projects gets offset by the state at a 58 cents per dollar, I think. So for every dollar we spend, 58 cents comes from the state. So although the price tag seems large and is. Just wanted to put that out there for
Absolutely.
people to remember that a lot of that comes from state aid.
And for folks who really want more information, our last joint session between finance and facilities delved directly into this very project, both in terms of facilities, but equally so the finances of what a capital project should and could look like. So that was part of our conversation. So Dr. Tripp mentions, folks looking at between $30 and $40 million. I think another question would be, one, what's the board's capacity to go out for a capital project, or what's the community's capacity? And then equally important to me would be a timeline, because part of this is that we are agreeing that that going out in May may not be the best time. Then the conversation becomes, we have longer term conversations to say, what is the amount and then what is the desired time frame? For the community's perspective, and my time on the board, we've gone out 4 times for a capital project. All of those votes have happened in May, attached to the budget vote as well as the vote for the election of school board candidates. With that being said, I just went back to look at my notes from NISBA. Within the past month, we can count 6 school districts across the state who have had their capital project vote in December. So it's also very common for people to have a capital project vote at a time other than the regular May vote that would take place. And so that was, again, just in a quick look of what our NISBA eclipse were saying. So this would not be a different practice. A number of districts engage in December votes or August votes or whatever the case may be. So.
And can you remind us how much it costs to have a separate election or a separate vote?
Well, that raises a number of questions. The average cost is between, I want to say close to $35,000 for an election. With that being said, that is assuming that we would have this follow the exact same procedures. You are not required to have a certain number of polling places. You always could. Where it depends on the number of ballots that are produced. It depends on the what our work is with the Tompkins County Board of Elections. So it could be the same, and it could be more efficient as well. There are things that could be done to consider.
I think the biggest question I have, Sean and Jill and everyone, goes back to what you said about the cost and having this be part of long-term planning, and already the deferments of maintenance we have on our buildings. I get that no one wants more taxes, but not having a robust capital project, from everything I've learned as a school board member, is fiscally irresponsible. And so I'm just concerned with not getting enough and what that can cause. And then another thing that really concerns me as well is, I understand we want to go bare bones, but we just heard about BJM and I'm hearing that there aren't going to be funds for a playground there. Well, playgrounds are really important to learning and to our students and for teachers and schools and communities. So I just really am concerned with, we're saving money, but what is that going to cost us in the long run? And I need some figures on that. And I mean, without having a financial person who's been guiding us all these years, I feel like I'm a little bit, there's no guidance here at the bigger picture. And that's my concern, that we're not looking at the big picture in the long term.
Aaron, I realize you asked all board members, and so folks can respond. Let me say a couple of quick things just so the community understands that question, because I think it's a phenomenal question, and one that we have to address. When I make mention of fiscal long-term planning and being fiscally responsible, this is precisely what I'm talking about in terms of if we were to go out and say the voters would approve a $50 million capital project for deferred maintenance. If that were the case, not saying that we are looking at that, let's say even $40 million and $170 million budget, because the district has done such an excellent job with our current funds and has an excellent rating, we would end up adding approximately, last time I think we saw the numbers was about $400,000 to $170 million budget total per year. So the idea is, do we spend $40 million to do deferred maintenance projects for an additional $400,000 to our budget? significant amount of money. Please do not mistake what I'm saying, right? That's a significant amount of money. And at the same point in time, we get to do and take care of some things that may cost us much more than that long run. You know, I forget what the number is for the roof. Someone help me. I'm looking at Chris. Do you remember? A couple $1 million, that I know. But I don't know the exact number, right? But there's an example. You need a new roof on a school ground. Say it again, Chris. 11, couple million, 11, right? You need a new roof on a school. That's going to cost you a couple $1 million. What a capital project would do is what Dr. Crampweiss had said is would authorize the school district to spend up to a particular amount. And at no point in time does the school district have to spend that amount. It's sort of a rainy day fund to try to make sure we get out ahead of some of these projects. But the purpose is, yes, we can definitely have a financial conversation. I would recommend folks go back and watch that finance meeting chaired by Dr. Blaylock to get an idea that we would not go out in a way that would have significant harm to the community and to our budget. We would not do. And we've already started running some of those numbers as well. And I know, Jill, you probably had something.
Yeah, two things I want to address. One is that this is far from a bare bones request. It deals with priorities, yes, but it's very much in keeping with what the district spends and has spent on capital projects in the past, in that we're not going for a 10-year capital project here. We're looking at a 2 or 3 year capital project. So we're staying around that $10 million a year. So it continues our habits, just tightens up how closely we look at them. And they are the priorities that were recommended by the people who take care of facilities for the most part. The other thing I do need to address is it's not that there's not money for the BJM playground. Playgrounds, like many other things, take a lot of planning. And the BJM playground is the next playground up. But we wanted to get going on decision-making about the Fall Creek playground, where there are plans. And I believe some of the planning for the BJM playground has already started, that some parents have been meeting with the Cornell professor. So I wanted to disabuse anyone of that notion that we're saying, no, BJM can't have a new playground. That is not the case. It is in the pipeline.
And just to chime in about the last finance facilities combined meeting, we had fiscal advisors marketing group here, and they advised us, and we looked at the local shares and looked at the opportunity, and the opportunities around 2027 to 2028 for construction costs to start. And where the representative had stated that if we can go for a capital project referendum next year, May or the fall, but it wouldn't be beneficial for us to go beyond spring 2026, because then we have to look at when do we start construction costs. So they did mention, and I'm looking at Chris, they did mention that the project scope, which is a pie chart that we currently have, and we have, let's say, an option out there now for 30 million. They had mentioned that they usually look at the project scope and to determine when is the best time for us to proceed with that. So I'm guessing verification that they did review that option, or are we due to send them a project scope for them to review?
We haven't received direction.
Okay.
So we have not sent it.
So therefore, going back to Jill, you'd said like, oh, okay, if we look at a short term for 2 to 3 years, 10 million, we do not know at this point. We have to get together the different options, because the way I interpreted it from the last meeting, that might be a bit low, because we might not be able to start the construction at that time, or something is uncertain around when construction's time will start, because the local shares, there's that opportunity between 2028 and 2029.
Yeah, thank you for bringing this up, Karen. This is, it's pretty complicated. And I don't pretend to understand it all, but I think the thing we have to keep in mind is that the projects even if we were today approve a certain slate of projects that then people could move forward, there wouldn't be any construction on those particular projects for at least 2 years. So you have to get the money ahead of time. You have to get the ideas out there ahead of time, and then the money follows, and then more planning happens, and then more approvals happen through state ed department. So it's a long process. But if we were not to do this, for example, and we were to lose our electrical systems at either Boynton or DeWitt, for example, we can imagine the kinds of, or lose a major boiler somewhere, we would be forced to deal with emergency funds rather than the nicely state-aided capital project funds for construction.
Process-wise, board colleagues, I think there are a couple of quick questions for me. And I'll put all three questions out so we can sort of rank them in whatever order. One, again, is there an appetite to put forward a capital project back to our ICSD voters? Two, is there a preferred time to which that happens? If we're talking about May, then that means probably a couple of extra meetings over the next month and a half to get that ready. And then three, what would be under the scope of those projects? And so I think last time we saw two different ones, one at 30 million, one at 40 million. There may be one ready at 50 million. So we can think about all those things. And I think the purpose of this conversation this evening was one is probably most importantly to have it on the agenda as soon as possible. Because if it was the board's will to go out in May, then we need to know that probably by next Thursday.
Or last Thursday.
Or last Thursday, and we need to make some things happen. Or if there's a decision saying, yes, we know that we're gonna need a capital project, but we doesn't need to be at the May vote, then we can still push those things along in an expedited fashion. But it would, from my perspective, it just gives a little bit more time to have some of those conversations about how we want to proceed. And it also gets to Aaron's point, it would cost, it would be an additional expense to not have, or to have a second vote. That's just the reality of it. It would be an additional expense. So those are all the things that I think that we're trying to play. I don't know how much of our time we want. I mean, we should try to get some idea of how board members are feeling this evening. We don't necessarily have to need to make a decision, but we are coming up fast on a decision deadline if May is our timeline.
Chris, would it be possible to throw those pie charts up on the, or is that? Yeah, is that, oh, great. Could we do that then so everybody could know what we're talking about? Thank you.
And not to start to influence my board colleagues, but to slightly influence us is that it behooves us that we need to get a capital project going because we have age buildings. And I'm in favor of doing one like the latter part of next year. Unfortunately, as a community, we don't always recognize there's a cost with everything. Like even when the budget was voted down in May, there was a cost to do a revote. So there is a cost that we will incur if we choose to do a capital project vote next fall. There's a cost to incur in our infrastructure if we choose not to do anything whatsoever. And especially when we do get the build-in aid.
I take it we're trying to bring up a couple of scenarios.
I, of course, memorized these pie charts, but not everyone has had an opportunity to look at it so closely.
Down to the details scope of work. Well, that's taking place. Any other questions, comments, conversations, board members?
If we as a board were supportive of a capital project and decided tonight we were supportive of that, could it be a May vote to save? Like would that just be a colossal amount of work and not quite possible?
No, we're still within the window where we could get it together for a May vote. Whether it's advisable or not depends on whatever.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. I personally like the idea of separating it from the main budget vote, because I think that's confusing to people.
Right, it makes it seem like their district is spending an additional 40
Right,
million.
right. Why wouldn't we just ask for, however much more if that's what we want? But it is a separate, rightly or wrongly, it's a separate situation. So I like the idea of separating it in time, but.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing some of them. I am also a favor, having seen and participated in that last meeting. I would also be in favor of separating the votes. One, just to provide a little bit more time for input and dialogue to see if we can come to some consensus. Of course, some people will want some other projects, or what one person feels is bare bones. We'll also need some feedback from
Right.
our architects and other partners. And then the other idea was that we're going to be soon, we will be very much focused, if not soon, we already are very much focused already on this upcoming budget. And I think that's going to take a lot of time to try to do both of those simultaneously. I feel we may not be able to do them both well as one board member. But Chris, you're here to join us from Tetra Tech. You've been involved with our current capital projects. And I see a PowerPoint, which means you're ready to go. What do we have up here if you want to share?
So, thank you for the opportunity. Again, here's a schedule that I've shown before, with the red line, kind of now we're in December, but we do still have time to have some time for communications. Katie's up in the back corner who helped us last time, with the backpack stuffers and whatever the pieces are that you'd like to use for communication. So we do have some time for that. There also is time before the March 25th date, which is that last date that the board needs to act to make a couple resolutions prior to the vote date of May 20th. So there is time to do that if we get some decisions made. Again, some basic historical sort of references points. Jill's referenced the 10 million a year. That was that, 2019 bond, 120 million over 10 years or so. It's about 12 million a year. Inflation happens. So the last bond vote was about 12.5 million. So now we're contemplating another vote. All right, so here are 3 graphs. So these are the most recent iterations of thinking, along with your administration, about what capital projects might be. I'm happy these are slightly different iterations than what we've seen to date. And we can make more of them. The reason I keep providing them is to try to get to, a collection of scope and a cost that resonates with folks, that we can hear back from you saying, yes, we're in the right direction. We're either very close, or yes, this is exactly the combination of scope items we want. I can go through these quickly if we want, or if you want to just sort of look at them for a minute. But there's a 30, there's a 40, there's a 50 million with different scope items on them.
Chris, let me just give an example of some of the detail that we're having a conversation about that I believe would probably be reflected here. And if it's not, let me know.
Mm-hmm.
One of the conversations is a geothermal heat well for Ithaca High School.
Correct.
Right. So moving away or not increasing lake source cooling, but trying to find other ways that are also carbon neutral to be able to heat and cool the building. One idea would be that we do it for the high school. Another idea that's been proposed for other folks is saying, well, what if we had the same well that would feed both the high school and Boynton Middle School?
Yes.
So one idea would be for whatever amount of money that would be, and I don't know what it is, the cost there for Ithaca High School, or if we go out with a capital project that we do both at the same time, as
Yes.
a possible cost savings long-term, even while upfront it would be more money. And
Yes.
so that's what those are the kind of differences that people may see reflected in the 30 million, the 40 million, and the 50 million are conversations similar to that. Is that fair?
Yeah, so I'll say in these specific examples, both that complete system that provides Ithaca High School and Boynton with cooling is assumed for all of these examples.
Perfect.
Yes.
Right. Conversation about BJM playground.
Yes.
That may be, is that in all 3 examples?
Yes, it is. It's the sort of
Yep.
magenta slice around 12 o'clock.
Gotcha. So because I can't see it, I know last year when we went out for the capital project, there was a lot of conversation about not just the increase in infrastructure to prepare ourselves for the electrification of buses, realizing that's a contentious issue, not just in our community, but across the state. But if that were to be the case, then there would need to be some infrastructure update. And then the other conversation we're having simultaneously is an aging bus garage. And what kind of either modifications or we were at one point in time considering a brand new bus garage, right? So what, can you just tell us some of the differences that may be up here? I can't.
It's pretty consistent across all three of these. It just includes the electrification of the bus fleet in all three examples.
Can you tell, what's wellness and the increases we're seeing in each slide there?
Wellness represents your nursing suites, basically. In the 30 million, it's just BJM. We've talked about the sort of structural situation that's happening there. So that's a baseline. The 40 million adds DeWitt, Boynton, and BJM, and LACS, excuse me. And then the 50 million adds the rest of them.
Okay.
And that's basically a refurbishment to allow them to be handicap accessible and have appropriate storage and things like that.
It's like meeting ADA requirements, basically.
Yeah.
And then the fire alarm for the third graph?
Yeah, the fire alarm, so that would be replacing the remainder of Ithaca High School and the remainder of South Hill Elementary School, which have older analog, many of your schools have older analog fire alarm systems. But those are two buildings that have a portion on a new system and a portion on an old system, and they don't always play well together. So that's why those two buildings are a priority.
And then I don't mean to bogart this, but HVAC, can you explain the differences in each and how important this is? I mean, especially, yeah, I'm thinking climate change, pandemics, wildfires, all of it. I'd like to hear more.
Okay, so the 30 million starts with, like I said before, a geothermal system for the high school and Boynton Middle School. The 40 million adds to that building control systems. So you may have heard of these pneumatic systems, which literally are air, through little tiny tubes running all around your building, controlling your mechanical system. Cuya Heights and BJM are the two buildings that have what we think are the oldest and most problematic systems. You might remember the two middle schools were updated in that regard a couple years ago. So that's what's added in the 40 million. And then the 50 million includes that as well as a similar system at Bell Sherman. And there have been some air handlers around the district that have been identified as being needing more attention more frequently. So it addresses those as well.
So before we ask more questions, I want to be efficient with our time and our purpose for this evening, right? This is an opening conversation. And so trying to gauge the board's interest. If the board is wanting to go out in May, then we should continue this conversation right now. If the board is not, if May is not our definitive sense of urgency, this is a conversation that we can continue in facilities and other areas to get into the details, to drill down in that way. But we knew, and also recognizing that we're -2 board members. But the goal was to sort of gauge the want and the will of the board. Not saying that understanding the amount of money, the kinds of projects aren't essential, they actually are. And this has been some of the ongoing conversations already been taking place at facilities, and without question OACMs, which all board members can read the minutes for if you are unable to attend. So I say that and to say my apologies, a lot of talk. Thoughts about what do we think our timeline is first? And I think that's a question for us to answer as a board.
Sean, I liked your earlier framework for this. Is there an appetite for going forward with a capital project this year? That can be yes and no. When, which would be May or some other time. And then I don't think we're quite ready for how much, but we might be. So maybe we should follow that.
Fantastic.
For those who are ready to decide, is there appetite on the board for putting forward a capital project this year?
Well, I have a couple of, maybe a few thoughts about it that I could add to the conversation, maybe. Yeah, I mean, I guess personally, I don't really like the idea of the extra cost of the 35,000. It kind of just troubles me a little bit. Second of all, I feel like if these are projects that, I mean, I think these are needs and things that we need to do. We're not really looking for some category of special spending for some interesting projects or something like that. These are things that we're going to need. My understanding, and maybe, I don't know, Garrick might want to talk more about this or maybe not, but just about, you know, the way that we pay off the projects and my understanding about debt service. And, you know, that's kind of an interesting part of the conversation from my understanding of going to the meetings and not being a finance person. It seems like part of our budget every year is dedicated toward paying off these projects, and we try to keep that percentage of the budget at 7%, which is a pretty small portion of our budget. And as we take on more capital projects, the way the formula works is we're not really increasing that piece of the pie of our budget. So it's not exactly an additional cost. If we didn't go out and request money for many years, the 7% could dwindle down to 6 or 5 or 4%, I guess, over many years if we didn't do that. But these are all things that we need. So I'm kind of feeling if there's an urgency to do the projects, I'm not sure maybe why we'd want to wait. I'm looking back at the, you know, not to bring up too much trauma from last year, but I'm looking back at the numbers from the budget last year. And at the first crack, while our budget only got 29% support, the capital project got almost 44% support, which was almost enough to pass last year, even in a year where people were, you know, uncomfortable about spending. So I'm just putting those things out for some additional consideration.
Because you were called out by name, would you like to speak, Dr. Blaylock?
Sorry.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot here. A couple thoughts. The first of all, from one perspective, I'm not sure this really matters. And when I say that, you know, there's nothing in the scope of the capital expenditures that's out of the ordinary. You know, we need to heat our buildings, we need to cool them, we need to put roofs over the heads of children, we need to repave parking lots. There's nothing in here that's radical or unusual. It's just a question of when we do it and whether we go out and ask for 30 million this year and 30 million a couple of years later, or we ask for a bigger amount now. So I'm not sure that really debating anything that's we're debating timing and the public's sort of appetite for this, but I don't think we're actually debating the projects themselves so much, except maybe with the bus depot. I think is the one issue, the bus depot aside. So in that sense, I think it's a little bit doesn't matter. You know, I was in strong favor of the 125 million, you know, capital project. That was what, how many months ago? 7 months ago. So if I supported 125 million 7 months ago, you know, now I'm asking, do I support 30, 40, or 50 now? Well, I supported 125 and I still support 125. And I think it's in the interest of our students and it's in interest of the taxpayers to do this. I mean, the reasons are many. You know, Adams pointed out that this is just a credit limit, not an expense. The expenses are all debated individually one by one. As Karen pointed out, we are advised by specialists. State aid formulas are very complicated. We have experts who tell us how to time these things and how to align them up in a way that keeps our capital, or rather our borrowing at 7% of our budget and maximizes our state rebates. So I think we're doing this in a very responsible way. So having said all that, I'm leaning towards Dr. Bradwell's, I think, such a suggestion of maybe calling for a special election in December. Adam, I'm aware that wastes 35 million. I'm also, I'm sorry, 35,000. That's why I get turned around.
The students taking notes, make sure.
35,000, I'm sorry.
Now it seems good.
So I was saying 125 million and I meant the 125 million, but 35,000 for the budget, forgive me. Thank you. And I also, you know, I'm aware that it is a burden on citizens to understand the issues, to research them, to go out to the polls and vote. And I like to limit that to once a year, all else being equal. At the same time, though, there's a lot to absorb in this, and I think it's maybe too much right now to ask the public to weigh in on what I think are going to be some difficult issues on the budget and difficult conversations, and also understand the capital campaign. So I think separating them allows the public to look at the budget and look at the capital projects as separate issues, digest them separately, and I think the public will have a better understanding. So I think in the interest of the public having the best understanding, and I believe these projects are in the public interest, I think we should separate them and go for I would say, a larger capital project to set a year from now. But it's not a strong feeling. I could be swayed otherwise, but that's how I lean.
I'd like to add as well, in the interest of the public and not telling them to go and watch another meeting, I want to ask one more question about the graphs, because I think for a lot of people, they have not been watching our facilities and finance meetings, and perhaps this is new for them. And maybe they're watching this meeting and they'd like to also know, what is the difference in the three graphs? What would the science section in graph, the second and third graph, add to our schools?
That would renovate 9 science classrooms, 3 at DeWitt Middle School upstairs, the 3 at DeWitt Middle School that are downstairs, and 3 at Boynton Middle School that are upstairs. The 3 that are downstairs at Boynton Middle School have already been renovated, or recently been renovated.
Thank you.
That also would fix some gas shutoff safety issues, I should mention as well, and provide new gas cocks and other safety equipment for those science labs as well. So there's definitely a safety component in that as well.
Chris, a question I'm not sure that let me just ask the question, right? So one of the conversations are having about timing. I would take it, I generally feel that the board generally understands that we probably need to go out for a capital project just in the best interest to maintaining classrooms. I think Garrick said it beautifully. We have to heat buildings. We have to keep roofs over people's heads. We understand that that needs to take place. If the time were to change, right? If the board were not to go out in May, but to go out and say October or December, would that have an impact on when shovels are in the ground?
It might potentially. So 7 months makes a difference in the process.
Yep.
Especially when it comes to having a good bid, a bid cycle. So you want to get out to bid around this time of year to set up for the next summer. So what that might mean though in practice is you might want to do an expedited review potentially with SED to get that first one sort of going and sort of catch up on a 6-month lag and a vote from May to, around this time of year.
And again, the details are always important, right? Even with the $120 million capital project over 10 years, that project has been done in phases. And we would anticipate, even if it's 30 million, a very similar thing, that it all wouldn't be done at one time.
Absolutely.
There would be a phase or two probably to make that happen, right? So could there be a delay? I'm hearing yes. And we still would have some time to do some other things to keep things moving. And we're still not complete with our current capital project. Like we'd still be working on that one as well.
I would suggest that since the transportation electrification of your fleet is one of those, being able to bid that around December would be great for the following summer. That work's already been done. We should have SED approval by the time, any of these vote dates roll around.
Gosh. So going back, hearing Joe reminding me of my own suggestion, seems like the board generally agrees that we probably need to move forward with some form of a capital project. Is that fair as a sort of a straw poll? We'll make sure we have a conversation with our 2 board members who are unable to join us tonight as well. Then the next question we were talking about is leaning towards timing. Is there a general, with everything, and not that we have all the information, right? But is there a general lean towards a particular one time over another?
Fall 2025.
I abstain from that one. I disagree, but
Would you say May?
I don't want to waste people's money or people's time. And we talk about equity. You should not be asking people to go to the polls more than once. You're going to ask them in the fall and then they have we want them to also vote in like the actual election. It's too much.
That one I would challenge slightly, just given our democratic process. We already asked people to go to the polls multiple times. Our school board vote is not aligned with our Senate
No,
vote,
I
our
think that is
primary
also
votes.
ridiculous,
True-
right? Like New York
true story.
State does it differently, and I think that's also wrong. But so I think that us as a school district asking voters to vote yet again is not okay, and it's also
Right.
an additional cost that we could work around.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still a little more on the May side, but I don't feel very, very strongly about it, and happy to, be supportive of the majority of the board if that's the will of the board. So.
Right. And we're not taking an action this evening. Oh, sorry. Please. My apologies, Joe.
I do feel strongly that we should separate them.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's confusing. I think it's too much information.
Mhm.
And I think delaying it a bit gives us a chance to really refine and inform people about exactly what we would be getting, what they would be getting for that money.
Mhm. That makes sense.
Karen, please.
And it seems like I keep reaching for microphones. Can we shift some of these microphones down somewhat? Thank
Like-
you. Yeah, and I agree that we just need to separate it. And it's unfortunate, but I thank you, Erin, for asking for the questions and all. But I would advise our community to go back over November 19th Finance Facilities Combined Meeting, because we had our investment company, we had fiscal advisors here, and we have a summary which our board clerks do an excellent job with, that tell you where to go to and what pinpoint, so that you could refresh yourself on getting a better understanding. Do we expect everyone to have 100% knowledge? No, but to make some attempt that we can have more conversation and at these public meetings, because don't wait until May, because come May, we're at a crunch period with vote that we have to go out to start the voting process and getting information out, let's say 5 or 7 weeks in advance. I agree with separating it so that we can bring a clearer picture to the community as to this is not a dollar amount that we're saying we're getting at this point. We can go for the amount and then spend up to that, knowing that we have built-in aid that allows us to spend. And even, I know maybe not at this time, but we did a big disservice to our transportation department, knowing how old that building is, that we're not doing any major improvements, especially around the size of staff that we have there. So we need to, this will give us time to go through the different options, go back to fiscal advisors to see the project scope and so forth, to say, okay, when do we start the process for construction, and when does SED approve of it?
Makes a lot of
Oh,
sense.
okay, no.
Makes a lot of sense.
All right, so if I'm trying to synthesize some of our conversation, not that there's consensus, but a general leaning in a particular direction, would be that to the community, yes, the board is going to be doing some work around a capital project, understanding some of the needs that we have as a school district around our facilities, that there would be support from some board members to separating these and maybe going out in fall of 2025, though again, not unanimous. And that the amount that we would have additional conversations, if that were the case, there would probably be a number of meetings over the next couple months that would help us both clarify the scope of the project, as well as have additional communication with stakeholders, partners, about what is the best thing for this particular project as we move forward. So the amount will happen at a later time.
Not too late.
Well, there still would be a sense of urgency,
Right.
but it wouldn't be we're making decisions and final things tonight or next week.
That's my reader room.
Yeah, got it right. Trisha, I'll work with you about how we capture that in the minutes. We'll figure it out. So thank you for the discussion. I imagine it's going to be on on Thursday's agenda as well.
I believe it is.
Yep, it is. So for folks who may want additional information, including board members, Thursday, we have a facilities committee meeting, 4:45 p.m. to 6 PM in this room. So we'll continue this dialogue and we'll probably put it on another future board agenda as soon as possible. So thank you. Thank you, Chris, for giving us the options. Thank you, board members, for engaging in that conversation. This is how democracy works. Next, presentation on our next agenda item is 9.2, a conversation about the Revenue Exploration Advisory Council update. This is a advisory council that was approved by the board, I want to say in August, if I'm not mistaken, and has been, for the most part, chaired by Dr. Jill Tripp.
Thank you.
Wow, this is, I don't even know what just happened.
There's been a coup.
Please.
Well, that discussion went so well. Let's have another one
Yeah.
on another weighty topic. I'll give you a little history here. And that is, I wonder if this will work. Let's see. Okay. The Revenue Advisory Council or the Revenue Exploration Council came about approximately 6 months ago in response to a resolution that I proposed to the board that was to request that Cornell up its annual donation to the Ithaca City School District by a considerable amount. At that time, it was felt that that was premature and we needed more information. And it was decided that we needed to put together a group of people who could talk about where additional revenue might come from, including Cornell, but looking at other options. And so that happened. And we've met approximately 6 times since then.
Can we show the presentation on the iPads, please?
It was kind of a roving cast of attendees, although a number of us were there each time. The attendees for at least one session were Robert Van Kuren, Catherine Cernera, Adam Krantweiss, Todd Fox, Margaret Fabrizio, myself, Ross Tate, Lavelle Brown, Aaron Croyle, Aurora Roger, and Peter Wissaker. And about half of those people are community members who brought information to us regarding other options for possibilities for revenue for the school district. The next slide is about our process. Let's see. And that is, basically, it was an extended discussion about options for additional revenue. We focused on short-term options. There was some overlap with the Legislative Advisory Council. For example, we were all interested in doing some advocacy for the district at the Industrial Development Agency regarding tax abatement. But we realized that was a more long-term issue than what we were hoping for, which was a shorter run at some additional revenue for the district. And we focused on options without a large upfront cost for the district. Although there are a number of things that would indeed bring us more revenue in the long run if we have to put a lot of money in upfront. For example, if we had talked some about developing a solar farm on district property, which is an appealing prospect, but it would involve a pretty large upfront cost for what would maybe be a good payback. But so that's those kinds of options we did not discuss in great detail. What we did discuss in considerable detail were these 4 options: sale or lease of district property, something called a utility tax, that we would request increased donation from Cornell University, and consolidation or redistricting as ways of saving money for the district. So as I go through each of those briefly, sale, lease of district property, the advantage is we could do that with Board of Education authorization. Disadvantage is that it does require evaluation of district property and an assessment of future needs. We'd want to be prepared for future influx of students or other needs, for example, new school buildings. And how much we could make for that is a question, although we do have a new request for proposals. Is that out yet, Bob? Okay, we're working on a request for proposals to receive valuations of district properties. And so what they're worth now, what they might be sold or leased for. And because we don't yet have that valuation, we don't know what the likely income from this would be. The next one is something called a utility tax, which was new to me. And a utility tax is something school districts are authorized to do. And a number of school districts around New York State have done this, often on cell phone bills. They put on a tax of 2.5 to 7.5% on cell phone bills. And the disadvantages, of course, are that that's a regressive tax, and that it's likely to be extremely unpopular, both among ourselves and with the general public. However, the school districts that are doing it around the state are receiving anywhere from $500,000 to $2 million a year on that utility tax.
Dr. Truck, when it says unpopular with council, what does that mean?
I mean, there were a couple of us on our council that were going like, no, we don't want to deal with that.
Wanted to make sure it wasn't common council.
Yep, no. Another possibility, request increased donation from Cornell University. Advantages, this could be implemented at the Board of Education's direction. Disadvantages, it requires negotiation and a campaign to engage Cornell. The income on such a donation, should Cornell choose to engage and agree with us, would be approximately $651,000 to $10 million a year. Although that may sound like a pipe dream, let me point out that there are comps for this. And here are some current donations from other Ivy League universities to their public schools, or in 2 cases to the cities in which they reside. University of Pennsylvania, 10 million to Philadelphia Public Schools. Brown, approximately 1.3 million a year to the Providence Public Schools. And Princeton, 4.5 million a year to the Princeton Public Schools. So this is not either unique or a radical proposition to request additional funding from Cornell. They currently gift us $650,000 a year. And the final option, consolidation / redistricting feasibility. Advantages, again, the Board of Education could implement this, would reduce costs by closing school buildings, reduce costs by sharing services, costs of programs and administration with neighboring school districts. Disadvantages, obviously, disruptive to students and staff. So those are the 4 options. And if I'm misstating something or misremembering something, I hope the people who were present in the council first will point out to me where I've made my mistakes. Otherwise, all errors are someone else's. Okay. And now we've all got the same basis of information and we can discuss.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jill, and to the committee of folks who put this together and who have been meeting every Thursday for pretty much the past 6 months. Board questions, comments, reactions. There's nothing for us to, this is a discussion item. This is not an action item. So this is just a discussion for this evening. So let's discuss.
Thank you to the committee. I guess this is on board docs, so any updates can be made and put back on. Okay, good. Because we should probably add to this pie chart why you explained why we started the Revenue Advisory Council, but to let the public know, where does public education in New York State, especially a small school district as Ithaca, where do we get revenues from, like the state, local taxes, and show that pie chart so people can be aware of, instead of waiting until May when they're hit, that's when they're aware of it. And on a regular basis, were there staff members participate in every meeting?
Bob was present at every meeting. I think, I can't remember who else. Oh, Dr. Brown was
Okay.
a regular attendee.
Yeah, because I would rephrase that redistricting feasibility slide on page 9. Erin and I are involved in TST, BOCES Small Public School Association.
School Board
School Board Association,
TST, yeah.
SBA, sorry.
Yeah.
Too many acronyms in this industry, School Board Association. And we are scheduled to hear about regionalization. So that's where the shared services and cost of programs with neighboring school districts, the regionalization, where it may not be disruptive to students and staff. We'll hear more about that next week. And it would be good to, I just quickly did a search at U of Penn. The university contributed for hazardous waste or environmental issues. They were specifically given to remediate that for that public school. So was that the case? Were there specific funds earmarked for any action points? And what we're looking at, funds to help defray the local taxes.
Yeah. The 650,000 donation that Cornell currently gives us is unrestricted.
Right, and that's what we're
And
looking at.
yes, and I don't know how each of those plays out, the ones that but it's right for research if anyone wants to look further into it. And certainly we would be grateful for any sort of additional funding, even if if it involved some particular project that Cornell was interested in, or
And how
a
did we come
program.
to the 650? Was it always at this amount? I'm still not sure
It has
about it.
changed over
Yeah.
the years.
So the history would be great to find out, like, when did we start that? And that's just with Cornell. There are different options I know that we're looking into.
Just to answer, make sure that we don't leave the community out there. 68% of ICSD budget comes from local property tax. 22% comes from state aid. 5% last year came from fund balance, so that actually is additional ICSD property tax, and 3.8% from other, which usually means federal funds as well as grants that our team has been able to secure in a variety of ways. And so if you look at the same sort of budget chart for neighboring school districts, a neighbor of ours that we share a property line with, it's almost a direct inverse. They'll receive about 68% of their budget from state dollars and about 25% from local property tax values. So it depends on what community you live in that would make that happen. And so part of the reason why we're having this question, I think that Dr. Blaylock responded to when this first began, is we know that it is not sustainable to continue to heavily weigh upon local property tax dollars to fund our district. So we were thinking about what other ways can we make this work. So just wanted to follow Aaron, sorry, you as well. I just want to make sure we got to that point.
Oh, yeah, I can't remember at the moment because,
My fault.
no, the ADHD, man.
Then I would add a couple of quick things. One, the conversation about regionalization. Folks should know that next week we have a board meeting, December 17th. We have the return of one of our rock stars who is no longer with us, but the district superintendent for TST BOCES, Lily Talkett, will be joining us to have a conversation about regionalization. And then the idea about possible consolidation, for me, while not revenue generation, I understand why the committee was talking about it. The board has asked that the district engage in 2 different studies. One was already mentioned. The first would be sort of a demography study or an enrollment projection study, getting an idea of where we're headed as a district. Our last one, I think, was 14 years ago. So we are overdue for that. And then including with that, part of a building condition survey would be evaluation of the properties of all this and usage space. How are all spaces being utilized? Simply for information gathering only. I want to make sure I stress that point. But we're engaged in those two processes as we speak.
And with that, I remembered, Sean, I mean, options for consideration. I think it's important, to clarify, we are kind of exploring all of these options as a board. We're not formally proposing them anymore. But do you all think it's fair to say, like, this isn't just options for consideration, maybe one, we are considering all of these kind of together as options that we're gonna likely have to utilize in some form to keep the schools running, right? Like, I think it's important to really point out that this is where we're at, because this isn't just like a fairy thing that we're hoping to generate revenue. This is real things that we are looking at that we're going to be discussing in the new year and heavily considering. And it's very hard conversations that we're having.
Yeah, and the flip side of that, of course, Aaron, is that we're looking at cost cutting all the time.
Right.
So it's not just we're trying to bring in more money, we're also, where we can, cutting our costs. But as Sean has pointed out, the bulk of our expenditures are contractually set. So something like 70% of our budget is what we've promised our employees.
The sale and lease of district property, we have 12 schools, but the district owns more buildings than that. The prime example that gets used pretty regularly is Danby, former Danby Elementary School. It's a 12-acre plot of land, 13-acre plot of land, including a building. That's one example. There are other buildings as well. And I'm not saying that they're just going to be doing that, but when folks hear that, that just gives some example. A utility tax, the school board looked at, I want to say 9 years ago, and decided not to go with a utility tax, even while a number of our neighbors were also considering it. And yes, oftentimes on cell phones, but also could be on NYSEG bills and lights and gas. That's something that we've had a conversation about before. And then obviously a request increased donation from Cornell University has been a topic of conversation for our board for a little bit of time. And the last one, I think we were talking about, I think that's a conversation for us once we have our demography study to see what anything may look like.
So, yeah, I might add that we'll be looking at some of the issues on the last slide, this 2 days from now, Thursday, in the finance committee meeting. I'm glad we're going to have the conversation about regionalization. One thing I think I have to throw out there, and Dr. Breville, you can correct me when I get this wrong, but the state would like to see consolidation of school districts. And there are pretty strong financial incentives to see that take place. And here's where I'm looking for the correction. But my understanding, for example, is that our building aid percentage is like 58%, something like that. And some of our neighboring districts have much higher aid ratios. So I believe, for example, if we were to merge with one of our neighboring rural districts, that I believe it's for 5 years, we would inherit their building aid ratio. So which is a powerful incentive. The difficulty, of course, I mean, whether you think that's a good idea or a bad idea, the difficulty of discussing it is it's not something that we control on our own. I mean, I believe then neighboring districts would have to, even if there was a plan, neighboring districts would have to vote to approve that plan. And so it's difficult to know how to consider an option that we can't unilaterally enact. But of all the ideas on the table, I think district consolidation is perhaps one of the most powerful in terms of cost savings in state aid. But again, how do you consider an option that is relying on voters in another district to approve? If I got that wrong, tell me.
No, I think the part that you're most accurate about is that the state is providing financial incentives for districts to consider the sharing of resources and or consolidation. Probably the best example would be transportation, right? That sharing transportation amongst multiple districts has the potential of saving money and generating money for one district at the same time, right? And so there are a lot of nuances like that that we'll hear a little bit more about when Superintendent Talbot joins us next week.
But correct me, those do not require a vote referendum, right? So.
No,
Yeah.
that's not my understanding at this
Yeah,
point. in
so
time.
those, I mean, I think those are more modest, but also perhaps more, something that, would be in control of us and another board.
I think as Jill and the committee indicated, where the board could decide something, the majority of these things do not require going out for a vote. As I look at them, if I'm looking at them correctly, right, that doesn't mean that we wouldn't have significant conversation with the community, input, feedback, dialogue, listening sessions. But for any of these, but yes, that oftentimes the Board of Education or boards of education would come to a decision. Yes, please.
I have a question. Like, seeing that UPenn is giving like $10 million compared to Cornell, is there like a comparison between the student population size of universities like UPenn and their taxable property compared to ours?
Yeah, it's a great question. I just looked up. Princeton would probably be the best example. There are about 4,000 students, so a little bit smaller than ICSD, which is just about 5,000 students. The additional questions I think you're asking are legit, like what is the house valuation? What is the median income with people within the district property lines? What is the median value of homes within the district property lines as well? And it's also New Jersey. What I mean by that, that's not a diss to anybody. What I mean by that, it's not New York State, right? So the laws and how we fund education are slightly different in New Jersey than they are in New York. But those are all questions that we should ask if we're comparing apples to apples or apples to oranges.
This would probably be a good time for me to thank the council members and note that this is the end of our involvement in this process. It's sort of back to you as the whole board at this point. The council,
Back to us.
yes, all of us. A council is by its nature looking at a particular issue, and it's temporary, unlike a board committee. So, unless I hear, please to the contrary, our job was to look at other possibilities and present them to the board for either further exploration or, a sense that we're not interested in doing something. So.
Additional questions, comments, thoughts? Anything we want to move forward, send to a committee rather than a council?
Yep.
How would the board like to proceed? Part of it could be to take it in and bring it back to another board meeting, just as a reflection, give some people time to consider the ideas. We also have a buffet of options in front of us.
Well, from that buffet, I will choose that we bring it back to the board because I really want to go back and see what the charge with. Mhm.
Additional comments, thoughts, reactions? Would that mean bringing on back in January for a conversation? Also identifying that we have two folks
Right.
who can't be with us that may want to weigh in as well.
Yes.
General consensus.
Sounds good.
Fantastic. Thank everyone to the committee that participated. Greatly appreciate the time, the ideas, the innovations. We'll put this back on an agenda item sometime in January, either the first meeting in January, the second meeting in January, for another extended conversation where whatever we're going to do, we can start at least planning to move in a direction. We just wanted to give people an introduction. So thank you for leading that group as well, Joe. Appreciate it. That will move us on to our next agenda item, which is committee updates. Folks may know there are summaries. I say it every time. Our communication team does a great job of creating committee summaries, fairly easy to find. They are so well done that, as Karen said, they are hyperlinked to the exact minute of the video if you're looking for a particular issue. And we know that we need multiple modalities and mediums to talk about our committee work. And so we'll just go through our committees and not trying to rush the conversation, but be succinct as well. And we'll do it, unfortunately, in alphabetical order as I can remember them or not remember them, which will bring us to curriculum and instruction. Dr. Krantweiss.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. So we've had a lot of different conversations happening and curriculum, and I think we didn't really talk since we had the last couple of meetings. So, one topic that we started talking about and will be continuing during the next meeting is the way in which standards-based grading has been used in the school district. For those who don't know, standards-based grades are used in different places in the district, but entirely in the middle school for all courses. And in this grading system, students are graded on a scale of 1 to 4, with each number corresponding to the extent to which students are meeting different standards that are covered in each class. Next meeting, we're going to spend some time talking more about the implementation of that grading system and the professional development that's been available to teachers, to talk about how we standardize that across classes and schools. We've also talked about the grading of high school credit-bearing courses taught in the middle school. Some students take algebra, earth science, or foreign language in the middle school, but then the high school credits are earned for taking them, and the grade counts toward high school GPA. And those grades are included in college applications. A few different concerns have been raised about that grading system. For instance, students taking the same courses in middle school versus high school are graded differently, and standards-based grades are used in the middle school level, and then grades are converted to a scale of 0 to 100 for the purpose of being included in high school transcripts. So some concerns have been raised with the conversion system. We've had a discussion about elementary report cards. Presently, we have 3 different grading systems across the district, one for high school, middle, and elementary school. There's some pros and cons to that. A change to the elementary school report cards was made in 2021, and that kind of ushered in the current grading system. There's been some mixed reviews from teachers and families, so we've decided to take that up and discuss that. And the committee plans to hear more from teachers about the pros and cons of that system. We've talked a little bit about students who opt out of taking New York State standardized tests in ELA and math in grades 3 through 8. Just a few key facts that we talked about. We have about 18% of students opting out. The opt-out rates are generally higher for math than ELA. ICSD students tend to opt out at rates that are higher than the state average. In some instances where test scores were below the state average, one of the reasons given for that in the past was that high-achieving students were opting out disproportionately and artificially lowering scores. We had some data presented by Lynn Klenkowski, who did a really great job showing some of that data, which didn't support that assertion. We found that class grades in ELA and math were lower for students who opted out than for those who took the exams. And knowing the reasons for lower scores is very helpful, especially when we're looking at improvement plans and implementing those with the intention of improving scores, but also just looking at standards to see if students are meeting those standards regardless of test data. And the last thing we talked about were some conversations surrounding shared curricula. This would be instances where many teachers or all the teachers are using the same curriculum to teach a subject. Sometimes that's across a grade or within a grade. Mary Grover has done a really great job this year and over the last couple of years trying to get some common curricula. This year, Eureka Math Squared is being used in grades K through 5. It was rolled out 2 years ago. And this year, Desmos is being piloted in the middle school. And related to that, we talked about some professional development provided to support the implementation of those curricula. And quite a few opportunities have been available over the last few professional development days and outside those days as well. So I know that was a lot, but we had talked about a lot over the last few meetings. And our next meeting is this coming Tuesday, the 17th at 4:30.
Thank you, Adam. Appreciate it. Jill, HR.
I think F comes before H.
That's why I said don't make me
Okay.
do that in public.
All right.
Jill, facilities.
All right. Facilities. We have received on a regular basis reports on regular maintenance and updates on ongoing capital projects. We received an interesting report from Armin Hurek on his attendance at the New York State School Environmental Health Conference, and he provided information on impacts of climate change, increased heat waves and their effects on students, and suggestions for lower cost or low cost mitigation measures for increased heat due to climate change. He also provided information on the status of electric school bus deployment in New York State. Um, In combination with the OACM group, meetings have been held with the principals of DeWitt, Boynton, and Enfield about their facilities priorities for the coming year. And I think that pretty much takes care of it for facilities.
We'll be back to you in a moment.
All right.
Garrett, finance.
Yeah, so we had finance meeting on the often mentioned November 19th date. We discussed three things. Interest rates are higher now than they have been historically. Well, I should say historically, meaning in the last recent years, I should say, historically compared to recent years. And so it makes a lot more sense for the district to look at where it's putting its spare change. We collect revenue in October mostly through taxes, and we spend it throughout the academic year. And so parking that money where it yields the highest short-term interest rate is important. We have an outside advisor who helps us with that. So we spent some time with that, and that is a bit of good news for the district. We are getting money from interest, short-term interest, that is really helpful. We then went on, as we mentioned at other times in the meeting, and talked about capital projects. And then we had a discussion with Zach Lind, looking at expenditures and staffing and what would be optimal levels of staffing at various facilities. I want to put a plug in for the facility, the finance meeting 2 days from now. This Thursday, we will be joined by Rich John, who is the chair of the IDA, and he will be talking to us about the abatement process and how that affects the district, and in particular, the Southworks project, which has been in the news. So we'll have that discussion this Thursday, and then time permitting, we will be presenting some sort of broad strategies for future budgets, different directions we could go on future budgets, and then trying to hone in a little bit on what is the sort of most efficient economy of scale in terms of enrollment, which leads us to the third issue, which is the RFP for the enrollment study and the RFP for the valuation study. Those things are tied together. We think there may be efficiencies in looking hard at enrollment, particularly at the elementary level, and so we need the study to help us understand that. But there's potentially from some savings in that arena.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I know education is full of as many acronyms as you can imagine, and RFP means request for proposal. So
Thank
we're
you.
asking folks to come do the work for us. We'll get those RFPs out soon.
Thank
Jill, back to you if my alphabet is correct for HR.
It's kind of the Jill night here.
It is.
Um,
I do want to go on record saying I wrote to Jill last week saying this is going to be a heavy meeting for you.
And
So,
I appreciated the heads up on that. Human Resources meets on a monthly basis, the Human Resources Committee. We have regular updates on staff vacancies. Vacancies are currently being filled by either overages, teachers working more than 1.0 full-time equivalent, and also on people who've been hired under an MOA. So in some cases, teachers who are not yet credentialed in an area are being hired under a memorandum of agreement because of the teacher shortage. We've also had a presentation on student-staff ratios throughout the district, presentation on staff benefits and what that consists of, and very recently, a presentation of how stipends and extracurricular remuneration of teachers for extracurricular activities are managed, and that is contractual. So most of these presentations came about because of questions by committee members, and I think we've had good luck with better understanding of how various processes happen.
excellent. Thank you, Jill. Legislative Advocacy Council, Aaron.
Greetings. Just a refresher, the charge of this advisory council is to engage with legislators on the local, state, and federal level in order to advocate for laws and policies that support ICSD employees and the success of ICSD students. So we had a resolution that passed that requests a school board voting seat on the Tompkins County Industrial Development Agency Board. I have to return a phone call for confirmation, but my understanding is that it's time for us to start discussing what board member might be the best fit for that position. So I should update y'all via email, and we might have time to discuss that at our next meeting next week. Our group has not met because of various timing issues. Looking ahead, the election in November, given that our charge is what it is, we're going to start exploring not just issues that to help generate income and work with legislators on funding for public schools. Of course, that is at the top of our list, but also exploring what changes to the DOE might bring to, state public schools, and really starting a conversation with our legislators and building those relationships, given what we could be facing in January. So that is going to be a focus of our work as we sort of shift, given the changes coming. Thank you.
I'd like to add something.
Please.
Tomorrow from 2 to 4, the IDA is meeting, and on their agenda is their resolution to add a school representative to their body of decision makers. So anyone who's interested in tax abatements, or specifically Tompkins County industrial development, might find that very interesting. I'll be there. I suspect others will be there.
And I may be completely wrong, so please, but not to correct Dr. Tripp. I thought their agenda included a discussion of ICSD's resolution to add a school board member.
It's unclear on their agenda.
Gotcha. So I think they're going to have a conversation about the resolution that the school district passed. But again, I could also be wrong as well. I believe their agenda is public information. So if not, we'll get it out there.
Discussion.
They're having a discussion on the resolution.
On our resolution.
On our resolution.
Okay, it's misleading on the agenda then. At any rate,
Yep.
I'll be
Yep.
there, and it will be interesting.
I'll be there. I'll be joining you.
Good.
So, and then to follow up with that, on Thursday, Rich John, who chairs that committee, will be at the finance committee meeting to continue that dialogue and provide some additional information for us as well. The last policy, or the last committee for this evening's update, is policy committee, which I chair. We have a couple policies, one which we're going to be reviewing this evening in a few minutes. And that is a policy on the distribution of flyers, advertising materials, announcements. I'll hold on to that one for a second. We have been in review of a policy that is the banishment of corporal punishment. It may come as a shock to folks, but it's only recently that the state has officially banned corporal punishment in New York State. Some states still allow it. But more importantly, our conversation has been held up slightly by trying for us to gain clarity as a district in terms of practice and policy about the use of the word timeout. Our policy includes, the standard policy includes the word timeout. We are trying to gather clarity about what does it mean. Some people have an idea of what a timeout is. It a timeout room? Is it a timeout space? Or are we just providing students a break from instruction to be able to gather themselves? That was partially led by questions asked by Dr. Tripp, as years of experience as a school psychologist, and also a number of us wanting to understand how best to make that happen. I think we have that clarity of language. We'll be bringing that to folks soon. It's not going to change what we do. We just want to make sure we codify in policy what should actually happen. We began last meeting a conversation about public use of school facilities, sort of reevaluating that. Things have changed since the policy was last passed, especially post-COVID. And so we're having some dialogue about what that looks like. We thank Dr. Bryman for helping to lead that. We also thought it would be a good idea to update our policy on emergency school cancellations, early dismissals, and delayed openings. We have all this on the website already, but we're going to now turn it into a policy, including procedures for how that happens. Folks should be on the lookout for that as well. Then the last two items is the policy committee has been engaged in a couple-month conversation about cell phone policy at a district-wide level, understanding that a number of our schools already have various forms of a cell phone policy. We've been waiting on the state. Governor Hochul went on a listening tour this summer, thinking that the state may have a statewide cell phone ban, which I believe 17 states currently have. A number of other ones are considering it. And at the same point in time, two of our colleagues, Aaron Croyle and Karen Yearwood, working with TST members of other school districts, were also making the ask, one that I will support, that the governor recommend that it become a local issue and not a statewide ban, so that individual school districts could decide what they want to do. I hope I captured that correctly. And we'll go through a process. Carrie Burke and Mary Grover have been leading that work. Mary Grover sent to the board something earlier today. Last week, the Department of Education put out at the federal level, while we have one, put out a guideline. I'll let that sit for a minute. The Department of Education put out guidelines about how to engage in a cell phone policy procedure. We're most likely going to use that. It's all standard practice. It's a very well done document, very easy to find via Google. And to the students in the room, for us, that would mean significant participation from y'all. Like, what does a cell phone policy look like in schools? And so more conversation to come about that. We envision that's going to be for another couple months, and that we would not have a district-wide policy this year, but we'd be working that with parents, caregivers, teachers, and other folks. And then lastly is a general review of our Board of Education policies. I was on the board when we created the policy committee because I recognized that our policies were significantly outdated. The policies are numbered from 0000 to 9999. And so we are going through each of those and trying to make sure we updated them. Just as a frame of reference, thanks to some work with Emily Tracy Arm and Tricia, we have at least 12 policies that are currently active that were last updated in the 1970s. And so that's probably not a good idea. So we're going to start going through each of those policies, see which ones are outdated. Sometimes they're just very well written and they should stand. They stand the test of time. Other times they are outdated and should either be deleted or updated. And we'll be going through all those again in a much more methodical fashion. So that's the policy update. Stay tuned. More information coming your way soon. All right, board colleagues. The next, we'll continue on with our agenda. Oh, and my apologies for those folks who are listening to that. Again, anything that sparked your interest that you want to know more about, please check the committee summaries. Again, it'll give you sort of a shorthand information about how to find additional information for folks who are interested. The next couple of items are a little bit more just sort of pro forma items. At the beginning of each reorganization meeting, we identified people to carry out certain tasks with the district. One of those folks has taken a job in the Vestal School District, which means we now have to reassign someone else to do those tasks. And that's what you're going to see for the next 5 agenda items. So we will entertain motions for agenda item 9.4.
I move to authorize District Treasurer Emily Ship to sign agreements, contracts, or any obligations with vendors, consultants, contractors, or other service providers for the 2024-2025 school year.
Second.
I heard Jill first. I hope there wasn't a competition. Moved by Karen, seconded by Jill. Questions, conversation, debate? Hearing none, all in favor? Unanimous. Thank you very much. Agenda item 9.5.
Oh, do you want to move? Okay, I'll move. I move to appoint Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources Zach Lind as purchasing agent for the Ithaca City School District, Ithaca, New York, for the fiscal 24-25 school year.
Second.
Moved by Adam, second by Jill. Questions, conversation, debate? Hearing none, all in favor? Unanimous again. Thank you very much. Agenda item 9.6.
I'll keep going. I move to approve Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources Zach Lind and District Treasurer Emily Scheib to represent the Ithaca City School District on the Workers' Compensation Cooperative Board for the 2024-2025.
Second.
Moved by Adam, second by Jill. Discussion, debate, questions? Hearing none, all in favor? Pass unanimously. 9.7.
I move to authorize Tricia Beresford, Clerk, of the Ithaca City School District, Ithaca, New York, and Zach Lind, Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, to sign agreements, reports, and claims to the State Education Department in connection with the operation of the National School Lunch Program in the schools of the City School District, Ithaca, New York, for the 2024-2025 school year.
Second.
Moved by Adam, second by Jill. Questions, conversation, debates? Hearing none, all in favor? Unanimous. And 9.8.
I move to authorize Chief Investigations Officer Robert Van Kuren and/or Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources Zach Lind to certify all payrolls prepared on behalf of the City School District, Ithaca, New York, for the 2024-2025 fiscal year.
Second.
Moved by Adam, second by Jill. Questions, conversation, debates? Hearing none, all in favor? Passes unanimous. Thank you very much. That brings us to agenda item 9.9, which is policy 1145, the distribution of flyers, advertising materials, announcements for a first reading. We had great help from, I want to say Katie. That's not correct. It's a long night teaching. The main purpose of this, of revisiting this policy, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Katie, was to make sure that we are in compliance with ADA requirements, particularly around materials that are used in a digital format. And I know there's something in addition to that.
Yes, so actually the initial reason why we wanted to look at this policy is actually around the disclaimer piece. And so right now, when outside organizations submit their flyers, they include these materials are neither sponsored nor endorsed by the Board of Education, the superintendent, or the school. And I get several complaints a year about organizations not wanting to include that. And actually, in speaking with Carrie Burke, her request actually is that we don't have it included on anything from local and state governments, particularly as it pertains to public health. There's not really, there's been a few times we've waived, like, especially during COVID, when those flyers were given to us, we did not put disclaimers on them. We worked with Tompkins County Whole Health last year that we waived the disclaimer for. So that really is the only instance that we are thinking of making the exception for, and wanted to have the discussion of whether or not we just state that in the policy. But then in reviewing the policy, there is no mention of any digital sharing of the flyers. So we made those changes.
Question. So what you're saying now or proposing now is that disclaimer be on all materials except for those that have originated with the Tompkins County Department of Health?
Or the state, yeah.
Or the state. Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
So where does it state that?
So actually, we didn't add that in.
Oh, you didn't add it?
Because that, yeah, we just wanted to have the discussion
Oh,
of whether we agreed, and then we'd add it in, but
I'm having a very hard time reading. What is the disclaimer, or hearing rather? What is the disclaimer?
It's on page 2. These materials are neither sponsored nor endorsed by the Board of Education of the Ithaca City School District, the superintendent, or this school.
Okay. And so the idea is that you want this to be clearly visible on.
so that's what it is now, yeah. So every flyer needs to have it on, but whether or not we want to make the exception for public health entities that don't, to not have it on.
Oh, okay. So making the exception for public health entities. And what did Carrie Burke advise?
She would like to see us not have to include it. It just seems weird, especially, around when we were masking, or, we did an anti-vaping campaign. It's a little weird to say we don't endorse this.
It implies a disagreement.
Right.
Yes.
Thank
I
you.
mean, COVID provides the best example. We are sharing information that came from the Tompkins County Health Department. It did not seem to make sense to then put a disclaimer on, hey, you should, you should wear a mask at that point in time if that was the expectation.
Right.
And there are other instances when government agencies or may ask us to share something. Oftentimes, even another example would be sort of
I would disagree with on that, but because I know that goes through at the high school, families can have to opt out
Yep.
of receiving that. And if they don't make that effort to opt out, which I am totally in disagreement about. So when we get to that discussion, I'll disagree at that point, but I'm in agreement with the health.
I mean, as it's written now, we say we can make exceptions. So if that's
Where
enough,
does it
that's
say
enough.
that? Sorry.
Just above that paragraph. Unless an exemption has been granted by the superintendent, all flyers and advertising material announcements must include the following disclaimer.
Right, okay. So we don't need to make any adjustment for any health related, since that.
The question becomes, as a matter of practice, does the board want that codified in policy? Or is this disclaimer enough that the superintendent has the ability to make to grant an exemption?
I think given the shifts that we're about to see in our government, I'm not sure I want to change this right now to make it specific. I like the idea of it in a normal system, but I don't want to get overly political here, but the changes potentially coming to the departments of health and that might trickle down. I don't know if we necessarily will want to endorse some things that might come down the pipeline in the next years. And so leaving it a little more general, I think is the better option.
That is generally what the argument is used in policy, that you want to be specific enough to cover the task, but not so constrained and so confined that it has to be reviewed and updated every single time when something happens that we cannot anticipate. So right now we're talking about the Department of Health. I can envision another situation where another government agency may be asking us to do something that we don't want to put the disclaimer on, and we want to leave that as an option to do so that it's not in conflict with each other. I should also recommend it, or I should also state that this is a first reading, right? And the process is first reading back to the policy committee for any review, additional information, investigation, back to the board for a second reading and then adoption. So we are not adopting this policy this evening. We're just giving the framework of it, if we so choose, the okay, and we'll take any feedback and questions that you want us to explore moving forward.
I have one more.
Please.
So the middle paragraph, so proposed policy content. And the second paragraph for digital distributions, agencies and organizations must ensure that all materials are ADA compliant and include accessible text, content, and support for screen readers. My concern with this, and this is something I do in my professional capacity, is that ADA compliant does not mean it's actually accessible. And I wonder if something we need to explore as a district, which is something I'm implementing again professionally, are accessibility best practices. And I wonder if we can explore that as a policy team, because ADA compliant does not cut it in many, many cases. And screen readers are a really great example. And unless you have someone on staff who can test something with a screen reader before it gets sent out, you're sending a bunch of mumble jumble most of the time. And so these best practices don't exist. You have to develop them. And I think we should do that as a district.
This is when I love when two worlds collide. So I'm in complete agreement with what you're saying. At the same point in time, as someone who writes policy, I'm also trying to make sure that we don't write policy that lands us in court. So if we say that we're going to do this, is vastly different than say we're going to try to do this, right? So you need some legal room. You still want to hold folks accountable, right? But if we did, and at this point, I'm not mistaken, that there is no alternative text sometimes that comes. And so we're trying to at least hold to that minimum standard,
Right.
while at the same point in time, pushing folks to do something more than that. So I'll look to you about what that language could look like. So we're not holding ourselves to a legal standard, but encouraging best practices.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense because it's very, very complicated and changing and evolving.
Yep. So I'll work with you about a sentence that could make that work. Additional questions board members may have about the policy? It will be on, well, we'll entertain motions if folks are willing or interested.
At the next.
No, what?
Oh.
A motion for a first reading.
Okay, I move to approve policy 1145, distribution of flyers, advertising materials, and announcements for first reading.
Second.
Moved by Adam, second by Jill. Again, first reading, if this were to be approved, it'd go back to policy and then back our way. Any additional questions, debate, conversation? All in favor? Unanimous. Fantastic. I'll connect with Aaron. We'll work with Tricia about some of that language. Katie, thank you for all your work on this policy as well. We'll follow up. I'm certain we'll be working on it
Great.
at the same time at midnight later on tonight.
Thank you.
Any additional dates? I know we have a lot of things taking place. Again, we'll repeat it again. Facilities, 4:40 PM on Thursday, 4:45 on Thursday, trying to get home. Finance is a change in date. We also have a public hearing for new charter school this Thursday at 6 PM. And then finance will take place at 6:30. With that being said, we'll bring our meeting to a close. Thank you all very much. Have a good
Thank
evening.
you.